There is a saying, all gave some, and some gave all. That's in reference to those who served in war, some of whom perished, and others perhaps who just gave a little as they were called on to give. It's important for us to understand that sometimes, as much as we'd like to help others, as much as we'd like to be there to bear their burdens for them, that is not necessarily our duty. As we look out at the world, we see chaos and struggle sometimes. Strangely contrasted against the reality that despite all of the struggle and the strife in the world, many of our lives continue to be defined by opulence and blessings. Despite the fact that there are people perishing at the cruel hand of violence around the world, many of us are still able to enjoy the peace and the sanctuary and the security of welcoming homes. And we are not called on, at least not at present, to pay any ultimate sacrifice. And yet still, we can give something. What can we give? I'm reminded of the period of time after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when then President George W. Bush said that he would, for the duration of the military operation, stop eating jelly beans. Now, I do understand that that is perhaps just political theater. It's optics. And it's not a particularly large sacrifice for the commander-in-chief to stop eating candy for a little while. And yet, it illustrates well the premise I'm referring to. The reward of giving up something as a way of remembering and honoring those who have given more. Outside of global conflicts and wars and things like that, there's also more personal struggles. Struggles that people who we love must face. And sometimes when we love others, we wish that we could do more to help them. And yet the truth is, every person has their own path, their own journey, their own adventure. And as much as we would like to take that cocoon and pry it open to help the caterpillar, the truth is, many times people must find their own way. And what we can directly do to be of service is limited, or perhaps nothing at all. So the sacrifices that we make are not so much for others as much as they are for ourselves. And it might seem a bit ridiculous to talk about sacrificing as a form of selfishness. But in a way, it is. Because there is a nobility in struggle. There is a nobility in sacrifice. And when we simulate those things in our lives, sometimes we gain a little bit of the benefits of those things, in effect. Sometimes it helps us if we just try to put ourselves a little bit in other people's shoes. To stop judging them and instead empathize with them. To stop ignoring those who have difficult duties to bear and instead contemplate and meditate on the duties that we ourselves have the opportunity to bear. Whether it's giving up a meal or giving up a little bit of consumerism, simplifying your life can be a really helpful thing. Sometimes we can make sacrifices just by being faithful in small ways. To be kind to someone when it's tempting to be judgmental and cruel-hearted. To make an effort to see both points of view in any given argument. To consume less resources than you take in. Just to make sure your life balances out when all's said and done. During the Second World War, some people perished on battlefields in faraway places, like the sandy beaches of France, or perhaps the Pacific Theater. And back at home, there were civilians who, much like today, lived in a country that was largely spared from domestic struggle and violence. And yet they did do their part as they could, conducting rubber drives, rationing their fuel, giving up small comforts so that they could honor and in a small way support the protection and service of those who made greater sacrifices. Sometimes we overlook the power of small sacrifices because we think to ourselves that if we can't do something epic, something great, something monumental, then there's no point in doing anything at all. And that's a flawed way to look at life. We should live our lives simply so that if we ever are called upon to give more, in that hour we have something to give. We should keep our calendars open so that if anyone would call upon us to give of our time, and they be worthy, we have time to give. We should be good stewards of our finances, so that if there is ever a time when someone worthy of our service calls upon us to serve, we have the resources to invest. And we should allow ourselves to be consistent and constant with a good attitude and a positive spirit. Because when blessings come into our lives, it's important that we are emotionally ready for those things. It's important that we get rid of bitterness and envy and cruelty and judgments and all those things that stand in the way of love and understanding. Essentially, we need to be good stewards of a little so that we're able to be good stewards of more, should the time come. Remember the parable of the talents in the Bible. One man was given a little, another man was given a bit more, a third was given still more. And the two who had greater amounts, they invested those amounts and they achieved a return on the investment. But the one man who'd been given the least, he just buried his capital. He hid it. He didn't bother to do anything with it at all. Then his master came back and said, "What have you done with my money?" And the man who'd been given little said, "Well, I had very little to do anything with, and so I just didn't do anything with it at all." And his master cursed him for that and said, "You at least should have put it in the bank so I would have gotten my interest." That's how it is in our lives sometimes. When we have a small amount given to us, we think that that's license to do nothing with it. And it's important for us to remember that small things do add up. And that oftentimes those small things are a test that we must pass in order to inherit greater things. Learn to sail well. In the small currents. And then you might be entrusted with bigger ships and bigger storms. But whether we're called on to give a little or to give a lot, let us live our lives as monuments to those larger-than-life figures who mean the world to us. Our families, our countries, all those causes which are greater than ourselves. Let us remember those things and daily give thanks for the lives that we have. Thank you for watching.